I made sure that the last couple of episodes that I started to enunciate rate, because I was told that it sounds like I say rape, but definitely not do that. Yeah. So, what's up, nerds? Welcome to another episode of the Nerd You're Looking For podcast, a weekly nerd culture podcast that discusses the culture through various segments. My name, of course, is Patrick Kuhn, alongside my co-host, as always, that Tyler Hunt. How's it going, man?
I am doing okay, man. How are you?
You kept me in suspense there.
Yeah, I was trying to decide if I wanted to unload all of my mental baggage on the podcast or not, but I went for the I'm doing okay. So
Okay, cool.
No, I'm kidding. I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good, man. Just trying to play some Call of Duty, try to go through that grind, and playing a ton of multiplayer. I realized I had quite a few achievements that I still hadn't unlocked, and for me, I was just curious the other day. I looked, and I have almost 3 days of playtime into Call of Duty. For me, a non-Madden game, that is a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm really digging that game. I was playing Battlefront 2 for a while, but then I beat that, and then I rented Doom. That game, a new Doom game came out a couple of years ago, and I never got around to it because I'm trying to get my 20 games in for my Nerd Year's resolution. And I'll have to be honest, and I don't know if it was just a mental thing, but my buddy Gavin, one of my comedian friends, he loves those games, and he had written an article on he works for a radio station, whatever, and he had written an article about when that game first came out, he rented it, and it made him like super, super sick, like playing it, and he had to return it, and he's like, man, I must be getting old, I can't even play video games. And so I booted that game up, and it gives you like a warning, like if you have seizures really easily, don't play this game or whatever. And I started playing it, and I started getting sick to my stomach, and I was like, I wonder if it's just knowing that he had written that article and knowing that they had thrown that warning up, if that kind of got into my head. But I just had to like stop playing that game for a little bit and take a break. And so I started playing Call of Duty a little bit the last couple of days. I will definitely get back to Doom because I was enjoying it. I think it got in my head a little bit.
Yeah, that's weird, man. I've never heard of a game causing somebody to get sick like that. As far as your 3 days on Call of Duty goes, like your wife, she is a lucky lady, my friend.
She is a very patient person to put up with some of the stuff that I do. But yeah, she lets me do my own thing, and I think it works out because she has her own things like The Bachelor and stuff like that she likes to do. So it's just like, oh, I'm going to go play some Call of Duty. She's like, okay, I'm going to do this thing that you never let me do because you hate the stuff that I like. So it kind of works out that way. But yeah, I think I'm just getting old with the whole Doom thing. And like I said, I think it got in my head a little bit.
Yeah, that's weird, man. As for me and my wife, this week, our favorite pastime is going to the movies and offending concession stand workers, apparently.
Oh yeah.
We went and saw The Post Thursday night, which I'm going to talk about it a little bit and what we're into when we get to that segment. But we always get popcorn and a drink. That's just our thing when we go to the movies. It's a lot of people's things. But
yeah, you talked like it was like an exclusive Hunt tradition.
Well, I mean, I don't know that we've ever gone to the movie theater together and not got popcorn. It's just what you do. And I know, but exactly, like, it's not like it's our thing or anything. But anyways, we went up to the stand, and we have a Regal, which is local to us where we live now. And whenever Justice League came out, they were selling those metal tin buckets and the cups that accompanied it. And they had like a giant stack of them on the counter. And we're like, okay, so we need a large popcorn, and I get a bottle of water, and she gets like a small drink. And this lady was pushing the Justice League tin on us really hard. She's like, listen, I know this movie came and went, but it's going to save you money. And I'm like, oh, well, we got one when the movie came out, and we don't need another one, and yada, yada, yada. She's like, you don't have to keep it. You could throw it away. And I was like, no, we'll get the other one. There's more popcorn in there. That's just kind of what we're going to do. And she went over and she started scooping our popcorn, and she was legitimately pissed off that we did not take the Justice League option, instead of the option we went with. I don't know if they were like, they had a quota that they had to fill, or the manager's like, we got to get rid of these fucking Justice League things. The movie was terrible. They're a disgrace to even have on our concession count. I don't know what it was, but she took it very, very personally, and it kind of weighed heavy on my soul the rest of the night on why she was so upset that we did not take her advice and get the Justice League combo.
Yeah, there has to be some kind of quota or incentive or something for them to sell it. Or maybe she was just mentally unstable, and then she's going to stalk you and potentially murder you later for not taking that tub. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have taken it. I don't buy those. I don't have room to store that type of stuff. I know that you're big into that. Do you keep them, or do you just use them because you get the free popcorn for a while?
So that was the thing, was whenever I lived in Evansville, there's a local movie theater where you buy this bucket and then you can get it filled for free for like 7 months. And if you go to the movies as much as we do, it kind of works itself out to where it's the smart move to do that, because you end up saving money. But up here, it's all chains and nobody offers that kind of deal. So I don't have any need for a bunch of popcorn buckets. It's not like I enjoy collecting them. It's just something that I have a lot of because of what the movie theater in Evansville did. So I have no need for the Justice League tin or like another of it. So it just didn't make sense to me. And she was very upset, and I didn't want to throw it in a landfill either. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's weird. We don't make the metal ones, obviously, because I work for a plastic company, but we always make the ones that, the plastic ones. And so we're always super busy in the summer with that kind of stuff. So it's actually pretty cool, because a lot of times, if I wanted to, I could get them for free, but I never really pull any strings, because like I said, I don't really have room for that in my house, and I also have no desire to collect them. So I almost got the Last Jedi one. Yeah. So just because, I mean, I love Star Wars so much, that would be cool to have. But again, don't have room. I'm literally like, I'll go to like a comic book shop that also sells pops. And I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm a collector, because really just kind of do the Marvel Collector Core thing and loot boxes in here and there. But I'll see a cool pop, and I literally have to think to myself, you don't have fucking room for that. Like you can't get that, because you literally have no room to display that anymore.
Yeah, that's kind of the issue that I'm running into, is I'm having to pick and choose what I display, and that's a dumb problem to have, so I just need to be more selective on the stuff I buy. I have a love-hate relationship with Pops as it is anyways, so I don't know. I got to do something different. I respect the adult collectors that have upgraded to things like Sideshow collectibles and the Hot Toys, like those really cool statues. I mean, they're crazy expensive, but obviously they look a lot cooler than the Pops do, so I respect those people.
For sure. All right, so that was kind of a longer intro than we normally do. We normally just start off these episodes by kind of just checking in with each other. We call it what we're into, so you already kind of teased what you were into, the post, but what'd you think about the post?
So I'm going to talk briefly about two movies I watched in the last few days that are both getting a lot of awards buzz and were nominated for Golden Globes, and I'm sure that are going to be nominated for the Academy Awards, and that is The Post, like I mentioned, and then I also watched Darkest Hour last night. So I have a few things to say about each of them, but honestly, I don't have a lot to say, because at the end of the day, I didn't honestly have a lot of opinions about these films. They were just okay to me. They weren't amazing. They definitely weren't terrible. They were just average movies about something that happened in our history. So I know some people are history nuts. In fact, a lot of people close to me are. My wife loves history. My in-laws love history. You love history. I believe you studied history at some point, right?
Yeah, I have a history degree, a bachelor's of science in history.
Yeah, so I guess for me, I pick and choose what pieces of history interest me most, and I don't find any period piece about something that happened in the past instantly entertaining. To me, the films still have to earn it, and I think that that's how most people feel, but I'm not immediately drawn to something just because it is a slice of history, I guess you would say. So let's start with The Post, since that was the first of these two movies I saw. It's definitely an interesting story, but at the end of the day, the movie's pretty simple and straightforward, and it's not something that needed to be stretched out over 2 hours, in my opinion. It essentially comes down to the last hour of it being, will they or won't they post this story regarding the Vietnam War and these government documents that are top secret. And honestly, the debate gets old after a while in the movie, even with the talent that's involved. I'd say that if it weren't for Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep being in this movie, I wouldn't have enjoyed it. Obviously, it's always fun to watch them act, and it's fun to watch them bounce things off of one another in a movie like this, especially being directed by Steven Spielberg. But I don't know that it deserves the critical acclaim that it's getting, and I think that part of it is just because of the talent that's involved with it. And then that kind of takes me to The Darkest Hour, where it was kind of more of the same. It's another World War II movie. It just happens to be one that features Gary Oldman in a lot of makeup, screaming a lot. And for me, this one of the big plot points of this movie is the things that happen at Dunkirk. And that's the second movie this year that kind of explores that a little bit. And honestly, I'd much rather take Dunkirk over this film. But Dunkirk is getting zero critical acclaim. And I think that that's because Darkest Hour is a more safe movie that slips into boring slumps at times. And, you know, Dunkirk, there weren't any amazing performances in that movie, and people are really gushing over Gary Oldman. You know, so I've kind of said my piece about how I felt about The Post and Darkest Hour and how they're kind of both average movies to me. And yet, like I mentioned, these are the movies that are getting critical acclaim this time of year. And I'm still trying to figure that out. All of these years into being a film buff, why do movies like Darkest Hour and The Post get critical acclaim, but a movie like The Big Sick kind of slips under the radar a little bit? Or even something like Guardians of the Galaxy, for that matter. I mean, I love Gary Oldman to death, but I'd put up some blockbuster performances against his Winston Churchill, if I'm being honest. And that takes me to another point that we've both made on this podcast before. We're film buffs, and we feel like there's some obligation to rate movies like The Post or Darkest Hour highly from a film connoisseur standpoint. And I don't understand why we feel that pressure. Is it because critics love it, or is it just because, you know, we think it's high art, so we have to force ourselves to love it a little bit? So maybe it's that we're hipsters, or we have some unwritten expectation that we hold ourselves to. And I don't know. This time of year is great for film. I mean, we have the Golden Globes, Sundance is going on this weekend, the Oscars are coming up, and all of these movies that are award bait kind of get released around this time. So there's a lot of stuff to watch. But who's to say that this time of year is more important than summer blockbuster season? If a movie is universally loved, why do we consider it a lesser form of art? I definitely didn't develop or plan on like putting a rant out there like this whenever I was planning on talking about both of these films, but I just found myself, whenever I was reflecting on them, having to convince myself that I liked them more than I actually did. And that I hate that. So I wish I would have had more things to say about the actual films themselves, but I'll be honest, man, they were kind of boring. And there were a lot of other films released in 2017 that I liked a lot more.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I fell in that trap. I mean, it was years ago, probably when I was in college. I considered myself a huge film hipster, and I actually had a goal of watching all the Best Picture winners. Like, I had the whole list out, and I would find one and I would watch it, and I could never get myself to say I didn't really like that, because I thought I was going against the grain. Like, I wasn't the film buff that I thought I was, because I didn't like this movie that won Best Picture. But honestly, who gives a shit? Like, and I think a lot of that has to do with us doing this podcast every week. Like, we're gonna say shit that people aren't going to agree with, especially as we build our audience. We're going to say things that people don't agree with. And as as amateur film critics, if we're just going to say the same thing everybody else says, then why would you even bother listening to us? Like, you come and listen to our podcast because we give you our honest opinion. So I kind of take pride in that. And I take, well, I guess pride is the best word that I could think of. But, yeah, if you can sit there and say, and I respect your opinion, of course. So if you sit there and say it's boring because this, and this, I respect that. Maybe I don't agree with it. Maybe I haven't seen The Post or The Darkest Hour, so I can't comment on each film. But if I were to watch them and I really enjoy The Post, I would still respect your opinion and I would still understand. Like, I hate when somebody says, "Oh man, this movie sucked. The Last Jedi was awful." Well, why was it awful? Well, it was stupid. I hated it. Well, no. I understand you didn't like it, but tell me why you didn't like it. Like, I could tell you why I didn't like The Last Jedi as much as I like The Force Awakens. I'm not saying that it's a bad movie by any means, but I can at least break it down for you. And I can respect any opinion as long as you can actually argue it with me and you can actually break it down. When people just can't give me a reason for why they don't like things, then I just dismiss your opinion. It doesn't matter to me. But you can like things and you can dislike things as long as you can defend why you don't like them or why you do like them. So, yeah, I kind of agree with what you said, and I fell into that trap a long time ago. It's probably been about 10 years since I really felt, I guess I didn't feel confident enough in my articulation or my opinion to really kind of go against the grain and say, oh, well, that Best Picture, that's actually not that very good movie, that this movie should have won or whatever. So I definitely agree with you that I think people are afraid to disagree. Like, oh, yeah, that's a Steven Spielberg picture. It has Tom Hanks. It has Meryl Streep in it. It's going to be good. It's going to be amazing. And Gary Oldman was Winston Churchill, and he did this awesome performance. Everybody's saying it's amazing, so I have to like it. No, you don't. You can like what you like as long as you can defend why you didn't like it or why you did like it. And I'm not saying if somebody's listening and really loved The Post or really loved Gary Oldman's performance in The Darkest Hour, that's awesome. Like, more power to you, as long as you can tell me why you liked it. Yeah. We're allowed to dislike something. You're allowed to like it as long as you can tell me why. So absolutely. Yeah, I've always felt like that. And most recently it's especially since we've been doing the podcast and doing it weekly, I've noticed that in people's arguments a lot more. Like, I expect you, because you're a very smart person sometimes about some things, I expect you to defend yourself when you make a claim, but it's when I'm arguing with somebody and they just can't defend it, it's just, okay, yeah, I don't care what you have to say anymore because you obviously haven't thought that much about it. But as far as The Post is concerned, that was my little rant that went on longer than I expected it to. But as far as The Post was concerned, I thought that they made a pretty funny joke at the Golden Globes about how it was a Steven Spielberg picture and had Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep in it, and then they brought out the Golden Globes. They're like, oh, no, not yet. We have to wait. And then I thought it was actually kind of funny that it didn't even win. I don't think it won anything. So I was kind of happy about that. Not that I've seen the movie. I don't have a dog in the fight at all. I just thought I was glad that this one movie didn't just completely mop up. Yeah.
And I'm honestly surprised it didn't, because it is the perfect Oscar bait movie, like they alluded to. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of my piece on it. What are you into this week?
Well, it actually kind of works out what I was just ranting about, because I watched something the other day I was actually really excited for. It's a Harry Potter fan film called Voldemort, Origins of the Heir. Now, it calls itself a fan film, and I think that's more for legal reasons, because, I mean, it's not really necessarily endorsed by Warner Brothers, but they kind of signed off on it a little bit, but it's not for profit or anything like that. So I feel like it has to call itself a fan film. But I think when you call something a fan film, I think it definitely has a negative connotation to it. Like, it's not as good And I feel like if you called this a fan film, it feels like it might be dismissive of it, because the special effects and the production value, it obviously had a good budget for a so-called fan film. And I was really happy that Warner Brothers signed off on it after I saw the trailer, because it looked interesting. And I think they could have easily, legally, they could have easily just been like, nope, you can't put this movie out. We own this property. You can't do it. But I thought that they recognized that it was fun and that it was well made, and they signed off on it. So I thought that was pretty cool. And it's always that area of the Harry Potter mythology, Tom Riddle or Voldemort, or his time as Tom Riddle in Hogwarts, is something that isn't explored a ton in the Harry Potter films. I mean, it's touched on in the Chamber of Secrets, and there's some moments later on in the films that they do explore it, just kind of trying to figure out where these Horcruxes are. So it's always an area of the mythology that I always wanted to learn more about. So I was really looking forward to seeing what this backstory was. And it was actually written and directed by the same guy, and I'm not even going to try to butcher his name, because I would completely destroy it. So I'm not even going to try. And this guy, he clearly has a talent for directing. Unfortunately, writing not so much. Let's just put it that way. If this fan film felt like a Harry Potter soap opera, it felt really melodramatic, and I don't want to come off as like a gatekeeper here, because I was definitely late to the Harry Potter party, and I've talked about that a lot. It's been in the last about year and a half or so that I've become a huge fan. I didn't really care for the franchise before that, but I started reading the books, and I watched the movies, and I definitely have a huge appreciation for the movies because I've read the books. But it didn't feel like, and again, I don't want to come off like a gatekeeper here, it just didn't feel like a real fan made this movie, because it was super dramatic, like I said, and it just felt like they just got a bunch of Harry Potter buzzwords and threw them into the script. Like, it felt like it was like, oh, we haven't said one of these things in a while, let's just throw it in. Like, it felt forced. And I don't feel like it was made by a real fan. And I know that sounds shitty, and I know that sounds like I'm gatekeeping, but I don't know. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that some of the stuff that they introduced in this fan film doesn't line up with the stuff that we already know from the actual timeline, the actual mythology. So that bothered me, and that was kind of made me very suspicious that maybe they didn't do enough research when they're writing this movie. I still think that it is a fun film for Harry Potter fans. I think you definitely should check it out. You have it's free on YouTube, so you have every opportunity to watch it. I will definitely put a link in the show notes to it. And I already put a link to it on our Facebook page as well earlier this week when I saw it. So I think it's definitely worth the 50 minutes that you endure to watch it. It definitely has some really cool moments in it. It's just like some of the mythology stuff doesn't line up for me, and the writing is really melodramatic, and again, it just feels like a bunch of Harry Potter buzzwords were just thrown in.
Yeah, it's pretty cool that this exists. It's just a bummer that it's not better, for sure. So, yeah, I always like whenever fan films like this can kind of be signed off on, or, just kind of looked over, I guess, when somebody doesn't get sued because of it. I think one of my favorite instances of a fan film being really good was that short called, I think, Dirty Laundry, which was about the Punisher, and it actually had Thomas Jane in it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I really like whenever stuff like this can come together. There's been cool ones in the past, like where they've done live action Power Rangers and they make it extremely violent and adult, and it's kind of a cool thing that people are able to go out and do. So it's cool that Warner Brothers kind of just let it fly.
Yeah, and the reason I kind of brought up that rant that I went on when we were talking about what you were into was if you read all the comments on YouTube, everybody's like, oh man, this is a great Harry Potter fan film, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, did they watch something else? Like, did I click on the wrong link? Because I felt like being a Harry Potter fan, and I do consider myself a big fan, even though, again, I was late to the party. I felt like I should like this. And I don't want to trash it too bad because, again, it's a fan film and there had to have been some love for the characters and the mythology to make this film. But I just felt like everybody just immediately loved it and was afraid to not like it.
Yeah, and that's the line, right? Is we can appreciate that this movie exists, but that doesn't mean that we have to say it's good.
Yeah, exactly. I felt weird. I felt weird because I was like, man, I'm going to trash a fan film. Like, what kind of monster am I? But honestly, when you have a budget like they clearly did, because they had some good special effects, they had some awesome production design. So they obviously had a budget behind you. And you put this out there, you are open to criticism. I'm sorry. Like, it's different, like, when you go to, like, a super, super indie film festival, like what we do in Shocktober in Irvington. Like, that's different. Like, these are just everyday people trying to do what they love and try to put out a cool story in a microscopic budget. But when you obviously have a budget like they did, and you put it out on YouTube and you get millions and millions of hits, you're open to criticism.
No, I agree.
All right, so our next segment is just plainly called Comics. Tyler and I read a ton of comics each week. We'd like to spotlight one or two. So what'd you read this week?
I read a few things this week, and I could have easily talked about those, but I wanted to try to keep it fresh on the podcast, if I'm being honest, and I don't know that I need to talk about like another Batman book or anything like that. So close.
I'm going to actually talk about a Batman book.
Oh, are you? Well, it's just I feel like, I do that so often that I wanted to maybe spotlight something that is lesser known. And that is a new book that came out this week called The Further Adventures of Nick Wilson. This is a 5-issue miniseries that is being published by Image, and it's written by Eddie Gorodetsky and Mark Andreyko. And I honestly was just kind of browsing what had come out this week and what I could potentially talk about, and this kind of popped out at me, and I was surprised at how much I really, really liked it. So this book follows the main character, Nick Wilson, as he navigates his mundane and somewhat depressing life. But the twist to this book is that he used to be the world's only real-life superhero. But then he mysteriously lost his powers some time ago, and he's been reduced to doing kids' birthday parties and has become sort of like a Z-grade celebrity. He mentions at one point in the book that people only ever come up to him to get an autograph or to tell him how bad of a superhero he was. But honestly, the superhero aspect of this book seems to be there to add an extra creative layer to the story, because at its heart, it's really just a personal story about someone who found success early in life and who is figuring out what to do with their second act. And through this first issue, there's humor, but there's also a display of the wide range of emotions that Nick is experiencing. We see him at a kid's birthday party in his old suit. We see him dodging paparazzi. And in my favorite scene, he is having lunch with his high school sweetheart that he hasn't seen in forever. And I think what draws me to this book and this story is I love when incredibly human stories are told through the lens of superheroes, and this book takes it a step further by stripping those superpowers away from someone and then following the aftermath. I think that this miniseries has the potential to be pretty special, and I'm excited to see where it goes. The only thing I'm not excited about is adding another book to my already giant stack of things I'm reading. But at least it's only 5 issues, and for that, I would definitely recommend picking it up.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. I always really like those types of stories. Like, you have so many different superhero stories and comic books out there, and they're great. We love them, obviously, but it's always kind of nice when they go at it with a different angle, and you get to see the more personal side of the superheroes. And I've said this a million times, and I'll say it a million more probably by the end of the podcast, but I love those types of superheroes. I love Spider-Man. I love the Flash. Those are my favorite types of superheroes. And that's why I don't like Superman that much, because he doesn't have that vulnerable side to him, or at least it hasn't been flushed out the way that I necessarily want it to. So, yeah, I really enjoy these types of superhero stories where they kind of take a different side to it.
Absolutely, man. What'd you read this week?
Well, like I said, I'm going to be talking about a Batman book, but not the main book. It's a book that I've talked about a couple of times and Tyler has talked about before. That is Batman TMNT. We are on the 3rd issue of the 2nd volume. And I don't know how I feel about this book. I do like that in the 1st volume, they definitely did go batshit crazy, and they did, they explored a lot of different Batman villains, and in this particular book, they focus mainly on Bane, and I appreciate that. I think, obviously, he's the most physically powerful of Batman's villains, so I think that that's interesting that they focus just on him. Unfortunately, I don't particularly understand the pacing of this book, because basically the 1st issue was pretty slow. Didn't really have a whole lot going on for it, and it left a little bit of a cliffhanger. I mentioned when I talked about the 1st issue of this book, it felt weird that they took so long getting there. And you would think the 2nd volume, like basically a sequel, it has the advantage of you've already got everything set up because you already had this 1st volume or had this 1st film or whatever. And then the 1st issue took so long to get there, and then the 2nd issue, it jumps in time a little bit, and we miss this huge event, and we just kind of see the aftermath of it. For example, what I'm referring to is basically the end of the 1st issue. You see Bane flip sides. He basically goes into the Turtles dimension. And then in the 2nd issue, a couple of pages in, they return. The Turtles and Batman go back to the Turtles universe. So they're in New York City, and basically half the city's on fire. You know that Bane has a part to do with that. He is the leader of that destruction. But I want to see that. Like, why did you not show me that? So a lot of things happen off panel in this series, and I don't understand why it does that. So the pacing of this book is very strange to me. And I don't know. It didn't go in a direction that I wanted it to. I understand that with these particular crossover books that aren't canon, that they can kind of do whatever they want and they kind of have fun. Obviously, in the 1st volume, we talked a lot about how it gets really batshit crazy at the end, and it kind of took a turn that you didn't enjoy. But in the 2nd volume, basically, it went pretty predictable. Like, it's crazy. It's not quite as crazy as the 1st volume, but it went in a direction that I was like, oh yeah, Bane with the Turtle universe. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I know where this is going to go. And it pretty much went exactly where I thought it was going to go. So it's been fairly disappointing so far.
Yeah, and that is disappointing. I, for the most part, liked the 1st volume of this crossover. I just chose not to pick up the 2nd volume because of, again, how much I already read. But it sounds like I maybe made the right choice there. So disappointing that they didn't execute.
For sure. And this definitely has a couple of more issues. I'm not sure exactly. I'm sure it'll be 5 or 6 issues like the 1st volume was. So, I mean, they still have a couple of issues to hopefully redeem itself. And I'm not saying that what they're doing isn't cool. It definitely is cool. It just was the easiest route that they could have gone with Bane in the Turtle universe.
Gotcha.
All right. So what's nerd news this week?
So a few stories here. The first one is concerning a movie we talked about last week in our Rotten Tomatoes draft. And that is that right now, Tom Holland is rumored to make an appearance as either Peter Parker or Spider-Man in the Venom movie that comes out later this year. So I went back and forth about bringing this up, but I feel like since this movie was announced, I've been very much open with my feelings about how Venom doesn't work unless it's introduced through Spider-Man, and I don't think that that's necessarily what's happening, but I think that they are course correcting a little bit by having Spider-Man featured, even if it's just a cameo, to tie it to something bigger, which I can appreciate. So again, I doubt that it's going to be the classic Venom story by any means. It can't be. There's not been anything set up for that, but it is cool that this has the potential to be tied to the greater Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm just curious what the real story there is.
Yeah, I mean, we'll never know, but I feel like this is the most Sony thing that they could have done. It was like they wanted to create this whole horror villain universe, it seemed like, and then all of a sudden people were like, well, where's Spider-Man? And they're like, oh, hold on. We're gonna have him in there. Don't worry about it. Like, if I felt like they, like you said, course corrected, and it just feels like Sony literally can't get out of their own way with shit like this.
Yeah, I'm curious. It could be, who knows, maybe it's a stinger after the credits. Maybe he's in one scene. Like, I know he's not going to be a huge player in the movie. I'm just curious what Marvel's involvement is then. Do they have the ability to say yes or no, Tom Holland can or can't film something for it? Or is it still Sony's rights? Is this tied to the Marvel Cinematic Universe? There's just a lot of questions that this kind of brings up for me, and I'm sure we'll get the answer as we get closer to the movie and once it's released, but it's a little weird.
I mean, you would have to assume that he's part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and if he shows up as Peter Parker, then this would be part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in a way. Now, since Marvel doesn't have the rights to Venom, I doubt that they would. I know for a fact he would never show up in a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, and it's just gonna be kind of I wouldn't say necessarily a bait and switch for Marvel fans, but it's definitely going to be disappointing because I think a lot of people are going to get their hopes up that eventually Venom will come into the Marvel Cinematic Universe because they have this little cameo or stinger, whatever they do with Peter Parker. So yeah, I think it's a shitty move, honestly. I know that you're a fan of it, obviously, because you wanted Venom to be tied to Spider-Man. And in a perfect world, I think everybody would want that, but I was actually kind of looking forward to seeing what they were going to do with their own little villain horror universe, and then it seems like they've just backtracked.
Yeah, I don't know. I would doubt that he plays any kind of part in it. He probably, like, Eddie Brock probably bumps into him on the street or some shit. Like, it's probably something really, really minimal, but we will see in October if that movie can keep its release date.
For sure.
Let's see. So, did you watch the Super Troopers 2 trailer?
I did not.
So, did you love Super Troopers growing up as much as I did?
I did, but it's been years since I've watched that movie, and I doubt that it aged well.
Yeah, I haven't watched it in a long, long time either, but I think that everybody loved that first movie, especially if you were in like middle school or high school when it came out. And they released the Super Troopers 2 trailer this week, which is coming out on April 20th, which is fitting. And this was a movie I think that they kind of funded partially through Kickstarter, and it looks terrible, which, I mean, I think anybody could have guessed that. Broken Lizard hasn't had a very successful track record since that first Super Troopers movie. But yeah, it looks really bad. It looks like it's going to fall in line with movies like Zoolander 2 and Anchorman 2 and all of these sequels that they made to comedies that came a ways after the original was released, like Dumb and Dumber 2. I can't see how this is going to be any good.
I mean, we've talked about this in the past. So, I mean, you have this problem with sequels in general, but especially comedy sequels. Comedies are so hard to do in general, and then when you try to do a sequel for it, it's like you feel like you have to go to the next level, and a lot of people don't understand that that's not how comedy works. So, yeah, I think that this is going to be a disaster, and I have very little interest in seeing it. I will see it, unfortunately, but I don't have very high hopes for it.
No, not at all. So this next movie, or this next story rather, is just for me, because on the podcast a lot, we talk about, oh, this movie's never going to get made, or this movie's never going to get made. Like we've said it about Gambit and about some other films that are kind of stuck in developmental hell. And this movie has been stuck in developmental hell for years and years and years. And every once in a while, something to come out about it that it kind of gives me hope. But now it's actually going to start production and filming in February, which I'm super excited about. And that movie is The Dirt, which is based on the biography of Motley Crue. It's being directed by Jeff Tremaine, and it's going to be on Netflix. But I'm super excited about this just because we've talked about it on a much earlier episode of the podcast about just liking Motley Crue a lot and being kind of raised on that type of music. But I read that book in high school, and they just did so many crazy out there things whenever they gained fame and popularity in the 80s. And I thought that it would make a really funny and disturbing movie, and hopefully that's what we get. But they've started casting, and it's actually going to get made, so I'm pretty excited.
Okay, cool, man. That story definitely is just for you.
Yeah, do you know who Machine Gun Kelly is?
Have no idea.
Well, he's an artist. He got cast as Tommy Lee, and it looks perfect because he looks like he may also have hepatitis, so it's going to work out really well.
Maybe Tommy Lee gave him hepatitis.
Yeah, maybe he's going to be method.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So this last story I have is kind of blowing my mind a little bit, and I'm going to see if you can offer any insight, if you have any insight. So
I know exactly what you're going to talk about.
Okay, so we'll see if we're on the same page here then. So Paddington 2 is the best reviewed movie.
Oh, that
ever.
is not what I thought you were going to talk about.
I know. I was like, man, if we're on the same wavelength here, like that's going to be impressive. I thought that was a little hard to believe. But Paddington 2 is the best reviewed movie ever on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, that's so weird to me. I saw that story and I was like, really? I mean, I heard a lot of good things about the first one, but it was a surprise when the first one came out, and then to make a sequel that does even better, I don't know. It blows my mind. I have not seen these movies. I have no desire to see these movies, but come on.
It's about a little bear in a raincoat.
Apparently it's supposed to be really funny.
There's no fucking way, man.
It has to be. There has to be something.
I'm going to watch these movies at some point just to see what I'm missing, because that is insane to me. Like, I would understand if it was like, oh, it's fresh, like that's fine, but for it to be the best reviewed movie ever on Rotten Tomatoes, that's absurd.
Have you actually read the reviews? Is it one of those things where it's like, because you'll read them sometimes and they'll be lukewarm on something, but they have to give it either a fresh or rotten, so it gets fresh because these guys are all lukewarm, or these women are all lukewarm on something, but they still give it a fresh rating. And so it gets 100% out of 200 reviews or whatever it's at. I have no idea where it's at, but if you actually read the reviews, it'll give you a little bit more insight on how they actually feel about the movie.
Yeah, I have not. So I might have to do that just to maybe lend some clarity to this. But yeah, it's so weird. So that's all I have, but I am curious, what did you think that I was going to say?
I thought you were going to bring up Dundee.
Oh, yeah. I posted that to our Facebook. There's no fucking way that's a real movie. So.
I saw that. I saw like one of the many websites that I follow on Facebook. I think it was GameSpot. Always puts out their own little videos about things that are going on. And I saw that and I was like, this is a fucking joke, right? Like they did something funny with Danny McBride, and I was like, no, this is a real, like, a thing. And I even went on IMDb and it's not listed. So I don't know what's going, like, it can't be a real thing. Like, I think your Super Bowl commercial thing is probably spot on.
Yeah. I mean, if it is a real thing, I don't know. I kind of want it to be a real thing at this point because it's so absurd and it's so out of nowhere, but there's no way that this just quietly got made. So
no, a big property like that, there's no way. We would have heard about it by now. So it has to be something like that. I mean, I would love for it to be like a Cloverfield thing where they just completely filmed it in secret. That would be really funny. But to do it for this movie seems very strange. And I think the movie itself, if it is a real movie, is going to be absolute garbage. Can we talk about that? Like, that's a one-note comedy for sure. Danny McBride doing Crocodile Dundee is the SNL skit of a lifetime, but that's all it is. It's just a one note, and you can't, we've talked about this before in millions of reviews, you can't do that in an entire movie.
Yeah, I feel like him especially, like he's kind of been more selective in the stuff he's done over the last couple years. Like he seems like a guy who enjoys creating stuff more than he enjoys starring in other people's things.
Yeah.
So I just there's a lot of red flags. So I'm saying bullshit, but we will see.
No, there's no way that this is a real thing.
Cool. So that is all I have for nerd news.
All right, so at this point of each episode, we have a main topic, and most of the time it is a review of a movie or TV show, but as Tyler kind of alluded to, it's kind of the Oscar award season, and we don't review a lot of those movies, so it's kind of a slow period of the year for us. Tyler actually came across a list that I thought was really, really interesting on Ranker. And of course, I will put a link to this list so you can see all of the movies on it on the show notes for this particular episode. But basically, it is a list that everybody can vote on their top rewatchable films. And we're not going to go through the whole list, but we're just going to kind of talk about their top 5, and then we're going to provide our own list of our top 5 rewatchable films. So Tyler, you want to go through the top 5 on Ranker?
Yeah, so we'll start with number 5 and work our way up to what people say is the most rewatchable movie of all time. So number 5 is The Princess Bride. Do you want me to pause after each one, or do you want me to get through the entire top 5 and then we can kind of dissect it?
I think we'll just go through the whole list, and then we'll dissect it once you're done.
Yeah, perfect. So once again, number 5 is The Princess Bride. Number 4 is The Lord of the Rings trilogy, which we'll talk about, but that's a fucking cop-out. Because number 3 is Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. Number 2 is Back to the Future. And number 1 is Forrest Gump.
Okay, so we got to talk about the most obvious thing that jumps out at you on this list. Now, again, we're not going to go through the entire list, but just the top 5. But the fact that they put the Lord of the Rings trilogy really bugs the shit out of me, because if you click on that link and you look at the whole list, they have every one of the fucking Lord of the Rings trilogy movies in a separate spot. So to fucking put the trilogy as its own spot and then put the other movies lower down the list is a huge cop-out. I think that's so stupid. I would agree that The Two Towers is super, super rewatchable. Spoiler alert, it won't make my top 5, but it was pretty close. If we had expanded this to maybe top 10, it definitely would have cracked that list. So I think that's the most glaring weakness, I think, with this top 5 list. I thought that Forrest Gump was pretty interesting at number 1. I do think it's an interesting movie. I think it's a well-made movie. I don't particularly like it as much as most people do, but it does have a lot of cool historical tidbits in it, which I think is why people love that movie so much. So I get why people think, for the most part, it's rewatchable, but for it to be number 1, I think is a bit of a stretch. I do like Back to the Future. I personally am not... I wouldn't say I'm not a huge fan, because I do enjoy those movies. Well, I guess the first 2 I do enjoy. The third one's pretty bad, I guess. But I do understand why I would make this list, because a comedy that's about time travel, and it's just a fairly nostalgic movie. I think that a lot of people connected to this movie when it first came out, so I appreciate that. Of course, Star Wars A New Hope is... Obviously, we're huge fans of that, so I'm not going to argue about that. It's surprising that Star Wars movie didn't make my top 5, but that's just because the rewatchable aspect of this movie, or of this list, is what kind of tripped me up, but obviously I do enjoy Star Wars movies. As far as The Princess Bride at number 5, my wife is a huge fan of that movie. Actually, I think it kind of goes back and forth between The Princess Bride and Royal Tenenbaums as being like her favorite movie of all time. So I'm obligated to say that I like that movie, but I am not a huge fan of that. Like, I get it. It's a fairy tale, and that's why everybody loves it. It's kind of like a girly superhero movie, so to speak. It's basically just a rom-com fairy tale. So I get why people have attached themselves to that movie. And I can't remember off the top of my head what the guy's name is, but Wesley in The Princess Bride.
Carrie Elwise or
something like that.
Yeah.
He was actually one of the longest lines at Indie Comic Con when we went there. Like,
Oh,
I mean,
really?
we were in the Charlie Cox line, obviously, for Daredevil, but he had like one of the longest lines. I mean, I think Val Kilmer had the longest line, but yeah, he definitely had the second one. I was surprised.
Yeah, that's weird. I don't know. For me, kind of like dissecting this top five, none of these movies made my top five. And like, I understand some of, like, Forrest Gump is universally loved, and while I think that it's a great movie, I've never really held it in as high a regard as everyone else seems to, but I get why that's number one. I also get Back to the Future. I think that that's an extremely rewatchable film. I almost put it on my top five because it's a movie that I haven't really ever gotten tired of. For whatever reason, the adventure in that film is consistently fresh, and it's just a fun watch. Star Wars, I mean, I get it, of course, and I will talk about a Star Wars movie in my top five. Spoiler alert. Lord of the Rings, I don't get too long. Not really my cup of tea. I appreciate the Lord of the Rings, and I enjoyed them when they came out, but I never once have wanted to rewatch them, so I can appreciate that it's on here. But again, like we already mentioned, it's a cop-out that it's the trilogy, and then all of those other movies take up other slots on this list. So that's something that whoever created this kind of missed. And then Princess Bride, I am in the same boat as you. I appreciate that movie, and I have enjoyed watching that movie. But as far as rewatchable goes, I think it is way too high. It's not a movie that I would ever consider rewatching yearly or anything like that. So not my cup of tea, but I don't necessarily disagree, I guess.
For sure. So you want to go back and forth with our top five rewatchable movies?
Sure.
All right. Do you want to go ahead, or do you want me to go ahead?
I can go ahead. So
all right,
my number five is Tommy Boy. And
okay,
yeah, so the rewatchable aspect of this list tripped me up as well, because I think my first draft of it was just my favorite movies, and that's not really fair. So, like, for an example, The Godfather is my second favorite movie of all time, but it's not on this list because it's a 2.5, 3 hour movie. And let's be honest, like, I don't sit down and rewatch that all the time. So for me, a movie like Tommy Boy is something that I probably see once or twice a year. Like, if it's on TV, I'm going to watch it because it holds up. It's still funny. Everyone loves it. I've never met a single person that says, oh, not Tommy Boy. Like, it's a really easy movie to sit down and watch with a group of people. And at this point, it holds a nostalgia factor as well. So that's why it's in my number five. Is if I had to look, like, if I had the statistics of my entire life and the movies that I've watched the most in my entire life, Tommy Boy would definitely be in the top five. So I feel like it's fair to put it on this rewatchable list.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I kind of, when I was making this list, the rewatchable aspect of it did definitely trip me up, because I was like, well, how is this any different than, I basically had the same conversation in my own head, was like, that you did. How is this any different than our top five favorite movies? And I was like, well, no, I want to kind of go talk about more of the movies that I've rewatched. And I think The Godfather is a really kind of perfect example. I'm not the fan of that franchise as you are, obviously, but I definitely have my own versions of those types of movies where it's like, I love that movie, but I don't watch it that much. So I try to think of the movies that I rewatch and want to rewatch and why I watch them so much. And so the first movie that came to mind is actually a movie that is on my top 10 favorite movies, and is a movie that, and the reason it made this list is one of those movies that I talk about where if it's on TV, I'm watching it. It's like, oh, okay, this is what I'm doing now. I'm just flipping the channels, and I come across this movie on TV. Okay, this is what I'm doing for the next hour or so, and that's The Shawshank Redemption. I think a lot of that has to do with the rewatchable factor, and that's kind of where I'm gearing my discussion towards. Why I watch this movie so much is because it happens in such a long period of time, and you have all these other characters that come along. I mean, it's his story. It's Andy's story for sure, but you have all of these other characters that come in and out of his life, and it's almost like you're watching like miniature stories, but you have this overarching story. And of course, a lot of that has to do with King's writing. It's based on a short story of his, so you definitely see that in the movie, and the fact that you know it's climaxing to this awesome ending. So it just, once you see it, it hooks you every other time that you watch it because you want to see him succeed towards the end. So I just think that it's one of those movies that has so many great pieces to it. And then, of course, it has that satisfying conclusion at the end. And that's why I want to rewatch it every time I can.
I'm actually surprised this movie isn't higher on the list that we kind of went over already, that people voted on.
Absolutely.
It's number 10 on that list, and I know we didn't go further than number 5, but it's just another, it's kind of like Forrest Gump. It's universally loved, and it's a longer movie, but it's a really enjoyable watch every time. You know, maybe people get turned off because somebody gets raped in the shower, and nobody gets raped in Forrest Gump. Well, Jenny. Well, no, she's not really.
Yeah.
But either way, I digress. I was just surprised that it wasn't higher on that top 10 list, because it is a movie that, again, I've never heard anybody say, oh, Shawshank Redemption, that's overrated, or The Shawshank Redemption, not again, anything like that. So
yeah. Is it like one of the highest rated movies on IMDb?
Yeah, it is.
And that's all user.
Yeah, it is 100% the number one rated movie on IMDb. So kind of why I'm thinking it's weird that it didn't show up a little higher on this list.
For sure. So what's your number 4?
My number 4 is Clerks 2.
Okay.
So obviously we've both gone on record many, many times about how much we love Kevin Smith and how much he's influenced us and influences the podcast. And for me, this is his best movie and his funniest movie. And the reason that it falls on my top 5 rewatchable list is because this movie played when I worked at a movie theater in Evansville, and literally anytime I had downtime, I was in that theater watching whatever part of this movie was on. And I was lucky enough to at one point be a projectionist, and I would have to stay late, and there would be like 2 hours where I wouldn't do anything. So I'd go in and I'd sit and I'd watch this movie. So I watched it a ton, and I still watch it at least once every year. It's just a movie that doesn't get old to me, and it's still funny, even though some of the pop culture jokes are a little outdated at this point. And it's kind of the same thing as what you were saying with Shawshank. Like, it has a very, very satisfying ending that is really feel good. So for me, that's why I think I kind of keep going back to it.
Yeah, for sure. And I like that. I like that submission of Clerks too. I appreciate that. I try to stay away from doing all comedies because I think that, and I'm not saying that, I don't know what your list is, so I don't know if you did any more comedies on it, but I try to pick a little bit from comedy, a little bit from drama. So I feel like comedies are definitely the easier rewatch movies because there's so many. I mean, they're so fun to watch. So I try to stay away from just like doing complete comedies. Like, one of my first drafts of this list was just like The Holy Grail and Groundhog Day and like a bunch of comedies on it. So I tried to mix it up a little bit. That being said, my next movie is The Holy Grail. I did keep it on from the first draft. I actually watched this a ton with my dad growing up, and Monty Python they have this unique ability of being able to make kids laugh because they have silly shit in these movies, but they also have really smart shit in it too. And so it's one of those movies that has really stood the test of time for me because I literally just rewatched it because I reread Ready Player One, and that movie plays a prominent role. Monty Python in general plays a prominent role in that book. So after I reread that book, I was like, man, I haven't watched The Holy Grail in a while. And so I rewatched it with my wife recently, and she doesn't necessarily appreciate that movie like I do. I think she was pretty much checked out about halfway through, but like there was stuff, and I've probably seen this movie at least 50 times. And there was stuff watching it as an adult that I appreciated that I never caught as a kid, but it's so silly. There's scenes in it that are just really silly, and as a kid you crack up, but then as an adult there's little things here and there that you pick up that there's no way you would have picked up as a kid. And I think those are the best types of movies and comedies, those that can relate to multiple groups of people.
Yeah, if you would have asked me in 5th grade what my favorite movie is, it would definitely have been this movie. I loved this movie growing up, and I still love it and still appreciate it. It's just kind of fallen down the list for me. But it's a movie I haven't actually seen in probably 2 years. Like I need to rewatch it just because there is a rewatchable factor to it, and it is still very, very funny. And I think I appreciate it more as an adult now than I did as a kid. So I don't know, maybe that's how I'll spend my Sunday afternoon before football starts, is watching Monty Python. We'll see.
Sounds good. And I don't want to spoil anything because I know you're going to eventually read Ready Player One before it comes out. You better hurry because it's going to come out soon. It comes out in March. But I did look that up after we had that argument. But I don't know if you've gotten to the part where they basically, there's war games and then there's Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and it's part of this Easter egg hunt that they do in the book.
Yeah.
And I don't know how they're going to do it for the movie. Like, are they going to even be able to do that?
Well, I don't know. The trailer shows a lot of different pop culture aspects to it, but I guess it depends on what they have the rights to.
But I mean, they literally, the part of the game is that they have to reenact these movies. So it's not like you're taking pieces like, oh, you're an avatar as a Ninja Turtle, because that's a thing in the trailer that we saw.
Yeah,
but you're literally playing line for line the movie.
I'm curious how they'll navigate that. So, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And you don't see anything like that in the trailer. So I'm curious to see if that's something, because obviously when you adapt things from books, you're going to cut out things. So I'm curious how they're going to navigate around that. If they can't do it, maybe they pick a different movie. But I don't know. I wouldn't like if they picked a different movie, but that might be a route that they go.
Yeah, I think that we're going to see just a lot of Warner Brothers properties in there.
Probably.
So we'll see. So I'm going to move on to my number 3 then. And this is a movie that I've really honestly just kind of found my love for over the last probably 4 or so years. And I don't know if this is on your list or not. I hope it's not. But if it is, so be it. It's Rocky Horror.
Nope.
Okay, cool. Because I know this is on your top 10 favorite movie list.
Absolutely.
So this movie, I saw it for the first time in junior high, and I was just too young to get it, I think. And when I revisited it in college, and then again as an adult, and made it part of my Shocktober viewings, I just kind of fell in love with it more and more each time I watched it. And it's a movie that has definitely not gotten old for me. And in that sense, the music plays a big part of that as well, because I love the soundtrack. Like anytime I have my iTunes on shuffle and a song from that soundtrack comes on, I sit and I listen to it from start to finish, because the music's so well done. But it's just, again, it's the whole thing with it being rewatchable is it can't get old, right? And even though this movie is going on 50 years now, because it was made in the early 70s, it hasn't gotten old to me, and it still holds up, and it's still fresh. And, you know, if anything, it's more relevant now than it was back then. So it's a movie that doesn't get a ton of critical acclaim anymore, and you don't see it on many like best movies of all time lists. But for me, like, that's where it should be, because it's so much fun, and the music's so great, and it's just a good watch. So that's why it's on my list at number 3.
Yeah, I agree with obviously everything that you said, because it's on my top 10. I love this movie to death. But the reason it didn't make my list, and honestly it probably should have, but I got in my head a little bit when I was making this list, so I didn't want too much overlap with my top 10 favorite films of all time. But yeah, I mean, obviously I agree with everything that you said. It's an amazing movie, and it used to actually be like my go-to answer for my favorite film of all time, Like when I was in high school, like that was my favorite film of all time. If anybody ever asked me that question, I was just completely blown away by just how fucking weird it was. Like, I don't know if I know for a fact, I never really got it until I was an adult, but I still just loved how wacky and weird and how cool the music was. Like, I'd never seen a movie like that. And like you said, it's almost 50 years old now, or I think it actually is 50 years old. And you still haven't seen a movie like it. Like, yeah. I think that tells you a lot about how just unique and how awesome this movie is, that after 50 years, you still don't have a movie like it.
No.
Even though they tried to remake the movie.
Oh, yeah. And which was a bloodbath. No, yeah, absolutely, man. I love it. So what is your number 3?
So my number 3 is The Dark Knight. Obviously, this is just an amazing movie, but what makes it rewatchable, other than the fact that we love Batman, he's one of our favorite characters, is the fact that it's not just a great Batman movie. It's just a great movie, and it's a great detective story. And that's, I think, what I like most about it. Of course, you have these other elements. You have Heath Ledger's performance as a Joker is amazing, and you have other people's performances in this movie are awesome as well. But you have those threads that make it a great movie, but also the fact that they didn't want to just make a good Batman movie. They made an amazing crime mafia movie that happens to have Batman in it. Well, it's one of the few movies that I describe as perfect, because even if I like a movie and it's one of my favorite movies of all time, I could see that you don't like Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Like, you could come in and say, well, this is wrong with it, or they could have done this, or the storytelling on this, or whatever. You can't do that for Batman, or you can't do that for The Dark Knight. Like, I feel like storytelling wise and movie wise, it is one of the few perfect movies.
So this is my favorite movie of all time. So I obviously agree wholeheartedly with everything you said. And it actually segues nicely to my number 2, because it is The Dark Knight.
Okay.
And I did the same thing as you when I was putting this list together, in that I didn't want it to be a rehash of my top 5 favorite films. But spoiler alert, my number 2 and my number 1 both are in that top 5 favorite film category, and I can't help it. Like, these are movies that I rewatch a ton because I love them. And for The Dark Knight, it's everything you said and more. It's a perfect crime movie. It's a perfect Batman movie. Every time I watch it, I'm just thrilled by Heath Ledger's performance, and I find some other nuance that makes me appreciate it even more. So it's just something that hasn't gotten old for me, and that's a pretty big compliment, because, I was talking about how I don't rewatch The Godfather all the time because it's so long. This movie is also really long, but it's something that I have no problem sitting down and devoting 2.5 hours to my day to, because it's so great. So this is my number 2.
All right, so just moving along to my number 2, because obviously I agree with you, and I just talked about The Dark Knight. I went a little different direction. This is a movie that I actually haven't rewatched in a long time, but when it first came out, not necessarily when it first came out, but when I first discovered it, I watched it a lot, and I think there's obviously a lot there, and that is Groundhog Day. And I think that this is so rewatchable, first of all, because it's hilarious, and Bill Murray's performance is fantastic in this. Is probably, if not his best performance, one of his best performances. But I think there's just so many layers to this movie, and I think that's why I put it higher on this list than some of my other movies that were on my favorite movies of all time. It's just that there's so many things in this movie to analyze. Like, it's a funny movie, good performances, but there's so many nuances to it that, I mean, literally people have watched this movie so many times and have made estimates about how long he was stuck on this day. Like, you can go on the internet and read people's theories, like, all laid out about how long they thought Bill Murray was actually stuck on this day. Like, that's how crazy people are about this movie. And that's why I felt like it needed to be higher on this list, because it is a great movie and it's a movie that I've watched a lot, but it has all of the makings for a great rewatchable movie.
Yeah, I really, really, really wish you hadn't brought this up in your top 5, especially so high, because now I'm forced to let everyone know that I've never seen this movie.
Really? So. I think we've had this conversation, and you're like, oh, I'm going to go see it right now. Or as soon as we're done recording, I'm going to go watch it. I guess that never happened.
Yeah, it's a matter of it being available to watch. I need to just honestly buy it on Blu-ray so that I have it. Because, I mean,
you buy so much shit. You blind buy so much. Like, buy this movie, you're not going to be disappointed in it.
Well, just to clarify, I don't buy as much as I used to, especially blind. But yeah, there's no reason I shouldn't own it. So I can't really speak to its rewatchability, to be honest. So I'll watch it at some point.
Boo.
All right, so I'm going to move on to my number 1 then, which it shouldn't be any surprise because I said that one of these movies was on my list, and it's I almost said The Last Jedi. It's not The Last Jedi. It's Return of the Jedi. And, I talked about this movie in my top 10 favorite films. This is kind of a placeholder for me for all of the Star Wars movies, but for whatever reason growing up, this is the film from the original trilogy that I gravitated to the most. And I know that's not extremely popular. Empire Strikes Back is the movie that people claim is the best Star Wars movie, but for whatever reason, my favorite is this one, and I think a lot of it has to do with, again, like we talked about in some of the other movies, the satisfying ending to it, and then for me growing up, the scene at the Sarlacc pit was just my favorite action scene ever. Like I know I've said it on this podcast before, but I'm gonna reiterate myself a little bit. And when Luke jumps off of the diving board, turns around, grabs it, flips over everybody, and R2 shoots his lightsaber out, and then he starts just mowing people down. I loved that so much. And then I think that the Vader-Luke lightsaber scene at the end of this movie is better than the scene between them in The Empire Strikes Back, which don't throw fruit at me or anything. I love that the Emperor's present, and he's taunting them and trying to turn Luke to the dark side, and there's just so many aspects to this movie that are gratifying, Ewoks aside, that makes it extremely rewatchable to me. And honestly, like if I sit down to rewatch the original Star Wars trilogy, because anytime I do, I typically just start with A New Hope and work my way through all 3 movies. It's just to get to The Last Jedi because I enjoy it so much. So that is
Return of the Jedi.
Oh my God, man. That's awful. Yes, Return of the Jedi because I love it so much. So that's my number 1.
Yeah, I feel like when we make these lists, I almost feel like it's so obvious that it's going to be one of these movies is going to be a Star Wars movie, so I don't put a Star Wars movie on here just for the sake of conversation.
Sure.
So anytime we ever do one of these lists, just assume that the Star Wars movie was going to make both of our lists. I mean, it's not on my list just for that very point. Just kind of, I knew that you were going to put one on there, and everybody's heard us talk about Star Wars so much that it just, for the sake of conversation, I left it off there. I think. And we've had this conversation on air and we've had it off air as well. I think when you're talking about Empire and Jedi, of course, Return of the Jedi, not The Last Jedi, I think they're such great movies that you have to nitpick. And for me, the Ewoks is a big enough nitpick that when I go back and forth between what's my favorite Star Wars movie, it's always Empire and for a long time it was Jedi. And then I rewatched it and I realized how stupid the fucking Ewoks are. And then I was like, okay, I'm back to Empire now. And again, they're such great movies that you are nitpicking. And that just, that right there, that element is enough for me to go to Empire. I still love both movies. I still love all 3 of the original trilogy. But the fact that Ewoks is in Jedi is enough for me to go to Empire.
That kind of, for me, harkens back to the conversation we had at the top of the podcast. Like, I didn't hate the Ewoks until I was told that I was supposed to hate the Ewoks. And then at that point, it's easy to nitpick. But for me, like, that's my wife's favorite part of that trilogy is the Ewoks because she loves cute, cuddly little animals. And for that, like, if they were able to get my wife to love Star Wars, like, I can kind of forgive the cheesiness of Return of the Jedi. But all of that aside, what was your number 1 rewatchable movie?
Okay, so I'm gonna comment real quick on what you just said.
Go ahead.
I agree with you about the Ewoks. Like, when I was a kid, when I first saw this, when it was remastered and it was in the theater, I thought they were adorable. But I liked a lot of shit when I was a kid. And as I grew up, I realized as a story, as a element of a movie and an element of a story, the Ewoks don't fucking matter, and they're really cheesy and they're really stupid. So I just wanted to throw that in there that, yes, I did agree with you when I first saw Return of the Jedi. I thought they were cute as fuck, but I was also, 8 years old when that movie came out, or however long it was when it was remastered. So I liked a lot of stupid shit when I was that young. So it wasn't because I was told to not like them. It's just because I've watched it and I realized that it's stupid storytelling for them to be in there.
Gotcha. So what's your number one?
My number one is Pulp Fiction. And a lot of the same reasons that I talked about with Groundhog Day. Obviously, Pulp Fiction isn't a comedy, but just the way that it's filmed and the different layers to the film and the way it's laid out, I think just makes for a really fun, rewatchable movie. And of course, it's a Quentin Tarantino movie, and he's just a master of storytelling. So it's just, even if you laid this movie out linear, it still would have been a really amazing movie and a really amazing story. So it's not just a gimmick. Like, if any other filmmaker did this and it wasn't as good of a story, we'd be like, oh, well, that was just a gimmick. But the fact that if you laid this story out linearly, that's not the way that word is pronounced. But I still think that you have this great, amazing movie that everybody loves. I just think it's such a cool movie to watch.
Yeah, I mean, Pulp Fiction's amazing. For me, it's not something I go back and I rewatch all the time. I even question if it's my favorite Quentin Tarantino movie sometimes. But obviously, it's fantastic, and it definitely has a rewatchability to it.
All right, so moving on to Nerd Favorite, I'm going to change it up a little bit. It's my week to ask the question, and since we just talked about this list from Ranker, the top whatever, I think there's like 60 films on this list in total of the rewatchable movies. And these are all done by fan vote. So if fans give it an up arrow, an up vote, it gets moved up higher and higher on the list. And one movie that just kind of caught me off guard that made this list, and that's kind of what I'm going to pose to you. What movie on this list, and we're going to pull from the entire list, which again, I will post a link to in the show notes of this episode, so you can check out the whole list for yourself. What movie on this list do you think doesn't belong? And for me, there's a few of them that I could kind of nitpick, and I was like, well, maybe this is not necessarily the best question to ask, because I think most of these movies do deserve to be on this list. I would say maybe Independence Day if I wanted to nitpick, but then I kept scrolling, and one just completely jumped out at me, and I have been screaming from the rooftops since basically the first time I saw this movie that I don't understand why everybody loves this movie so much, because I think it borderline is garbage. And that is A Christmas Story. And I understand why people like it. They saw it as kids, and it's a nostalgic thing. But I didn't see it as a kid, and I have not heard anybody tell me, other than, oh, I saw it as a kid, I watch it every year at Christmas, and it's nostalgia. I've never heard anybody give me a different argument why they love that movie. Like, I want you to tell me that, oh, you really like the performances, or the story is really cool, there's a cool plot twist, or not necessarily a plot twist, but you know what I'm saying, like, other reasons than just nostalgia. And that, it just bothers me that that's the only reason that people can give it to me, because I don't think it's a good movie. I don't think the storytelling's all that good. The acting, it's mostly kids, so you kind of grade on a curve, of course, but I don't think the acting's very good. And I just don't think it's overall a very good story. And I don't know. I think that if people didn't watch this movie and it wasn't nostalgic, if it just came out like right now, it would be a lifetime garbage movie.
Yeah, I mean, those are pretty harsh words about a movie that almost everyone loves. So a little bit of behind baseball or whatever. What do they say? Is it behind baseball or
inside baseball?
Inside baseball, whatever. We were kind of chatting about this before we started recording today. And when you asked me why I liked this movie, that was my answer. My initial answer was, well, nostalgia. I've watched it my entire life. So I've had a little bit of time to gather some thoughts, and, I'm not going to apologize for the nostalgia aspect of it, because I think that there are probably movies that you really like because they've been a part of your life for so long. But for me, it's like this goes hand in hand with Christmas. And I do think that it's a good story. So we've talked on the podcast many, many times about how much I love coming of age movies. And this movie, while it doesn't explore like a long period of time in Ralphie's life, it explores this month that was very important to him. And I enjoy watching that aspect of it. I think that for the storytelling part, what I like about it so much is there's not really like the overarching plot is that he wants this Red Ryder BB gun, but it's more so little snippets of his life through December. So I love the stuff with the bully. I love the stuff with his brother. I love seeing what this family did during Christmas. And I think that that's why people like it so much, is because it reminds them of the Christmases they had with their family when they were young. So I can appreciate that, you watch this movie later in life and you don't get it. But, obviously people find this movie hilarious. I don't think that it's as funny as everybody thinks it is, but I think that there's definitely a charm factor to it that, I really like.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. There are movies that are nostalgic for me that probably aren't very good movies, but my problem is, and that's not what you did, obviously, I respect your opinion, and you were able to kind of lay it out why you enjoy it, and it wasn't just nostalgic. But when you can't tell me why you like a movie, oh, I just watched it as a kid. Well, okay, that's cool. So did I. I watched a lot of movies as a kid, but I also understand that some of the movies that I watched as kids are garbage. It kind of goes back to the Ewok conversation we just had. I saw it as a kid. I thought they were cute as fuck, and now I hate them. So I've grown up, and I understand that nostalgic isn't everything. So
yeah, and I almost put a Christmas movie on my list, because there are movies like this or Home Alone that I watch a million times in December. But it's really hard to do that in January for me, because I'm not in that mindset. But yeah, I love and the funny thing about A Christmas Story is I always think it's older than it actually is. Like, it came out in 83 or 84.
Really?
Yeah, and it seems like a movie that came out in like the early 70s, and people talk about it like it's like this old classic movie, like It's a Wonderful Life. But honestly, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that old.
Did you watch, and I'm pretty sure I know your answer, but did you watch the live production of it? Remake, I guess?
No, I didn't. I heard it was awful.
Yeah, I'm sure it was awful. I didn't. I saw a commercial for it, didn't even know it was happening, and then I quickly forgot about it.
No, I did not watch it. So, all right. So my least favorite movie, or I guess the movie I most disagree with on this list is, I don't know. I was looking it over while you were harping on A Christmas Story, and there's two movies that stood out to me. The first was Blade Runner, but it's really far down the list, so I don't know that that's fair. It's like 120th or 130th, somewhere in that range. So I don't know that it's fair to say, oh, Blade Runner is not the 130th most rewatchable movie of all time. So I don't think that that's fair. I feel like I'm never going to probably watch that movie again, or not for at least a couple years. So again, not fair to say that one. So I'm going to talk about a movie that we already discussed, and that's in the top 5, and that's The Princess Bride. So we both kind of alluded to it already. I don't disagree with this movie being on the list, and I don't disagree with people loving this movie. I just don't see how it's number 5 on this list of 200 movies, or however long it is. It's a good movie, and I think that it kind of goes back to what you were saying with A Christmas Story, with nostalgia, and people saw this when they were younger and love it. But to me, it's not a movie that I'm like, oh man, I need to rewatch The Princess Bride. It doesn't make sense to me that it's so high. I don't disagree with it being on the list. It just does not deserve to be in the top 5, in my opinion.
Yeah, I obviously agree with you, because I was...
Tread lightly, man. Your wife might.
Yeah, I know. She can hear me, actually. Every once in a while, we'll be talking about something, and she'll be like, oh, why'd you mention me on the podcast? So she could definitely hear us. So I have to keep this one quiet. But, yeah, I don't know. I appreciate it. It's definitely a good movie. And I appreciate that they try to make something different, and it's a fairy tale and what have you. So I definitely appreciate it for that aspect. I do completely agree with you that it shouldn't be that high. I will say with the Blade Runner thing, yes, neither one of us really love that movie as much as big sci-fi nerds. We feel obligated to love it, but I think it actually should be a little bit higher because there is a lot of theories surrounding this movie, whether he's a replicant, and like there's so many things around this movie, mythology around it, that fans have kind of speculated about, and I think there is enough in this movie because it is a futuristic sci-fi movie that people have rewatched it, and I'm actually surprised it's not higher on the list.
Well, there are 6 versions of it that you can watch, so it definitely lends itself to rewatches, I guess.
For sure.
All right, man.
All right, so that's it for, I believe this is episode 173 of the Nerd You're Looking For podcast. Of course, we'd appreciate it if you subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any podcatcher you use, we're on it. I made sure that the last couple of episodes that I started to enunciate rate, because I was told that it sounds like I say rape, but definitely do not do that. Yeah. So my buddy Jeff was like, every time you say that, it sounds like you say rape. So I make sure that I enunciate the T on there. So you can also check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com. Comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Nerds You're Looking For. Check out our Twitch channel. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Google+. Email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. And of course, vote for us for Podcast of the Month at podcastland.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt.
we are The Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, guys.
See you guys.